Hi everyone, welcome back to Reading Corner. It's so good that you could join me today. I've got some really lovely, relaxing books to read. Just different stories and from different kinds of authors, and just a little bit interesting for a rainy old Friday afternoon that we're having today. I don't know whether it's raining where you are or whether it's even Friday, but whatever you're doing, whatever kind of day it is, I hope that you enjoy these books. First one is called The Further Adventures of the Owl and the Pussycat. So after the owl and the pussycat fell in love and sailed away in their pea green boat, what happens next? Then we have a book about a boy called Khalil, and he lives upstairs from his friend Mr Haggerty. And we find out what happens when they do some activities together in the backyard, in the garden. And then finally, we have a book about a boy called Joey and his horse called Fury, and what sort of adventures they have. So I really hope you enjoy these. So let's get started with The Further Adventures of the Owl and the Pussycat. The owl and the pussycat went to sleep by the light of the moon so pale. Their beautiful ring was tied with string in a bow round the pussycat's tail. They dreamed of mice and raspberry ice while slumbering cheek to cheek. But down flew a crow who unravelled the bow and flew off with the ring in his beak, his beak, his beak, and flew off with the ring in his beak. The owl and the pussycat woke next day to find that their ring had gone. They wept in the shade of the bong tree glade where never the sun had shone. The owl sang songs of terrible wrongs while Puss blew her nose on a leaf. Then she said with a yowl, "Oh, lugubrious owl, let us travel in search of the thief. The thief, the thief, let us travel in search of the thief." The owl and the pussycat sailed away in a beautiful blue balloon. They took some jam and a honey roast ham, which they ate with their runcible spoon. They sought the ring from autumn to spring till they came to the Chankly Bore, and there stood the crow with his head hanging low, shedding tears on the silvery shore, the shore, the shore, shedding tears on the silvery shore. "Alas and alack," said that bird so black, "'tis I who have caused your woes. I fear I have sold your ring of gold to the pobble who has no toes." So they crossed the sea and the jelly bow lee to the pobble's improbable land. And there he sat with his aunt and her cat, and they spotted their ring on his hand, and they spotted their ring on his hand. "Dear friend," said the pobble, "you see how I hobble, for all of my toes have gone. Yet my fingers are fine, and this ring is divine. Oh, do let me keep it on." Said the owl, "To-woo," and with pussy he flew to visit the calico doves, who flapped in the air while they knitted a pair of impeccable gossamer gloves. Two gloves, two impeccable gossamer gloves. The owl and the pussycat showed the gloves to the pobble who has no toes, and both of them fitted, so well were they knitted in stripes of magenta and rose. "I am quite in love with the right-hand glove, and the left is a joy to behold." He clapped and he hopped, and he willingly swapped the gloves for the ring of bright gold, bright gold, bright gold, the gloves for the ring of bright gold. The owl and the pussycat sailed back home to the land where the bong tree grows. They dined on stew with the Jumbly crew and the dong with the luminous nose. They danced a jig with the turkey and pig, and then sang to the owl's guitar. Oh, dearest love, by the stars up above, how delightfully happy we are, we are, we are. How delightfully happy we are. The end. So they had to go on an adventure to find their ring, but they made some friends along the way and came home safely, which is a good adventure to have. Now, our next story is about Khalil and his neighbour, Mr. Haggerty, and what happens when they do things in the backyard together. It's called Khalil and Mr. Haggerty and the Backyard Treasures. Khalil's new house had an up and a down. Upstairs lived his family, which was big and busy and noisy. Downstairs lived Mr. Haggerty, who was quiet. Khalil loved the backyard, so did Mr. Haggerty. While Mr. Haggerty worked in his garden, Khalil hunted for bugs and interesting rocks. He lay in the grass and read his library books. Sometimes, if he couldn't figure out a word, he'd ask for help. Mr. Haggerty would squint through his glasses. Tarantula, Mr. Haggerty would say quietly, or volcano, or doubloons. Sometimes Mr. Haggerty needed help with his words too. Where did I put my digging thing, my hole maker, my shovel? Look at this big, not beeper, not beastie, beetle. That summer, the house was hot. Upstairs and downstairs, it was much too hot. Even in the backyard, the sun burned and the air sizzled. One morning when Khalil went out, everything looked droopy, even Mr. Haggerty. Khalil decided this would be a good day to find buried treasure. The ground was hard to dig. Khalil found a few things, but not what anyone would call treasure. Mr. Haggerty dug too. He found some carrots, but they were small and shriveled. The word for this was discouraging. We need refreshments, said Mr. Haggerty. Refreshments turned out to mean big pieces of chocolate cake and tall, cold glasses of milk. Soon, Mr. Haggerty and Khalil both felt much better. Maybe we'll be luckier tomorrow, said Khalil. Maybe, said Mr. Haggerty. Upstairs that night, Khalil had an idea. Downstairs, so did Mr. Haggerty. And here they are, out in the backyard in the night time. What are they doing, I wonder? First thing in the morning, Khalil raced down into the yard. Mr. Haggerty was already there. He looked excited as Khalil. You better get digging, he said, and his voice was not the least bit quiet. You too, said Khalil. This was when something wonderful happened. Two somethings. No sooner did Mr. Haggerty put his shovel in the dirt than he dug up a big, juicy carrot. That would have been wonderful enough, but then Khalil found buried treasure. This calls for refreshments, he said. They celebrated with carrot sticks and chocolate cake. It's our lucky day, said Khalil. Lucky's the word, said Mr. Haggerty. That night, as Khalil looked out his window upstairs, he thought of another word, a very good word, one of the best words of all. Downstairs, so did Mr. Haggerty. Friend, Isn't it lovely to have a good friend that you can do interesting and fun things with, like dig in the garden for vegetables or buried treasure, or to share refreshments, like lovely chocolate cake and cold milk on a hot day? I'm really happy that Khalil and Mr Haggerty can be friends with each other. That's very special. Now we're going to read about a boy called Joey and how his really good friend is his horse called Fury. Joey saw the new black horse in the corral, and he knew right away that he wanted the horse for his own. "What's his name, Dad?" Joey asked. "He's called Fury," his father, Jim Newton, said, and they soon knew why. Some of the hands at the Broken Wheel Ranch tried to ride Fury. Then Jim Newton tried. The big black horse snorted through his wide nostrils and laid his ears back and kicked up his heels until even Jim Newton was thrown. "He's a wild one," said Jim, shaking his head. All the time, Joey was watching, and when the hands had gone back to the ranch house, he slipped into the corral. The big horse watched him from the corner of his eyes. Joey spoke softly. "Easy there," he said. Fury snorted a little, but he did not shy away when Joey stroked his glossy neck. The next morning, Joey was up early and in the corral. "Hi there," he said softly to Fury. The big horse whinnied a greeting and stretched out his neck to Joey. Fury and Joey were friends. After that, Joey and Fury were always together. Joey began to ride him, first around the corral, then around the ranch. "Guess Fury is a one-man horse," the ranch hand said. "A one-boy horse, you mean," Jim Newton said. "Joey knows just how to handle him." Joey did know how to handle his horse. He knew that Fury was still frightened of strangers, so he began riding with some of the boys from nearby ranches. Soon, Fury became used to the other boys. By the time fall came, Joey could ride Fury safely to school. One day at school, the teacher said, "The Frontier Days celebration is going to be held at the fairgrounds. There will be special races for boys with their own horses. You were all invited to take part." When school was over, the boys asked Joey, "Do you think Fury can win a race for us?" "Fury can do anything," Joey said proudly. "It would be wonderful to win a race on Fury, but how would Fury behave with so many strangers around?" "Why, I've never even taken him into town," thought Joey on the way home. So he turned into the road that led to town. He would test Fury that very day. The town was busy that day. Joey looked around at the traffic and the people in the street. Suddenly, Joey was afraid. What if Fury became nervous? What if Fury threw him in front of all those people? "Come on, we're going back," he said, giving the reins a sharp, hard pull. Fury gave one surprised neigh. Then he bucked, throwing Joey to the ground, and off he ran. When Joey got home, Fury was already in the corral. One of the hands was trying to quiet him. "What happened, Joey?" asked Jim Newton sharply. "He threw me," said Joey. "Fury threw me." "Well, if Fury can't be trusted, we'll have to sell him," said Jim Newton. Joey was too hurt and unhappy to answer, but that night he lay awake, thinking, why had Fury thrown him? Joey thought and thought, and at last he knew the answer. He knew what he would do. The next day, there were big doings at the fairgrounds. There were stagecoaches and Indians and people dressed as pioneers. Jim Newton was there too, looking for Joey. Jim had left the ranch early that morning to help at the fairground, and now he was going to meet Joey. Suddenly, Jim saw his son. Joey was leading Fury, whose black coat was shining in the sun. Joey grinned happily at his father. Dad, I've been making friends with Fury all over again, he said. Dad, he can be trusted. Please let me show you. Please let me race him. Race Fury? But I told you we'll have to sell that horse, said Jim. He's dangerous. He's not dangerous, Dad. I know now why he threw me. It was my fault. I was afraid of what might happen, and I made him afraid too. Then before Jim could say anything, Joey leapt onto Fury's back. Fury stood, quiet and gentle. Jim looked steadily up at his son for a minute. Are you sure you're not afraid now? He said. Joey gently stroked Fury's neck. I'm sure, he answered. Please, let me race him, Dad. I know we can do it, Fury and I. Mr. Newton nodded, and Joey quickly turned Fury toward the racetrack. They were just in time to take their place with the other boys and their horses at the starting line. The starter fired a pistol in the air. The horses leapt forward, and the race was on. As they rounded a turn, the horses were all bunched together. Fury was crowded by horses on both sides, and their hoofs made a noise like thunder. For a moment, Joey was frightened. Then he pulled back on the reins, letting the other horses draw away. He spoke gently to his horse. It's all right, Fury, he said. Now, if we can just gallop around those horses. That's it, Fury. Fury was pushing ahead. Fury's hoofs pounded against the ground. Faster, Fury, faster, shouted Joey. On and on they went, and Joey grinned with pride as his horse passed all the others. Then Fury was over the finish line. He and Joey had won the race. Joey's father came running up to him. You did it, Joey, you did it, Jim Newton said. You handled Fury beautifully. He's a good horse, Dad, Joey said. That day in town, I didn't trust him, so he didn't trust me. Now we trust each other again. The next minute, Joey was surrounded by the boys of his school. They cheered and shouted and waved their hats. Joey grinned. Didn't I tell you that Fury can do anything? And this time he knew it was true. The end. I really hope that you've enjoyed those stories today because I love reading them to you. And I hope that, like the Owl and the Pussycat and the Pobble and the Jumbly Crew, like Khalil and Mr Haggerty, like Joey and Fury and his friends from school, that you have some good friends you can do adventures with. And whatever you do, I hope that you just have lots of fun. I will see you again next time at Reading Corner. Thanks for coming to see me here today. Bye for now.